Welcome to presentation 6 in the series where we're looking at the insights from Ezekiel. I've entitled this, The Exile to Come. As usual, let's just look back for a moment or two in previous presentations, and I want to start by looking at a broader historical context. I'm doing this in terms of the kings who were reigning in Judah. King Manasseh had a very long reign, and he was a very evil man. He encouraged pagan religion in the land, and that brought in all sorts of problems, including temple prostitution and child sacrifice. The whole moral and ethical standards of the nation just started to fall apart. His son continued on the same line, but after only 2 years he was assassinated. The grandson Josiah came to the throne as a child, and it broke the contact with his parents and grandparents. And he started, when he became a teenager, major reforms to restore the land, its spiritual and moral and ethical basis. But foolishly he got involved in a fight that was not his own and was killed prematurely in battle. Now, at the same time, the Assyrian Empire fell finally in 612 BC, towards the end of the reign of Josiah, and the Babylonian Empire started to take over, but it was still competing with the Egyptians. One of Josiah's sons, Jehoahaz, was put on the throne. He lasted 3 months because the Egyptians came, they didn't like him, they removed him. They put on the throne Jehoiakim, another son, presumably because he was going to be more pliable to the view of the Egyptians. He dies prematurely, and his son takes the throne. He lasts 3 months. By this time the Babylonian Empire had grown in power. They didn't like him, so they removed him. And they put on the throne another son of Josiah, Zedekiah. He was very weak, unsure of what he was doing. And finally, in 586 BC, the final destruction of Jerusalem, it was sacked. Zedekiah was captured, blinded, and taken to Babylon as a prisoner. There were various times of deportation under both the Assyrian Empire and the Babylonian Empire. Let's look at the Babylonians. They did it sometimes just to take away talented individuals they spotted when they conquered a land, and they took them into their own administrative setup for their own advantage. But sometimes it was simply to undermine any organized resistance. They took away the leadership class, the people who might cause trouble. But it also broke up cultural and national identities by mixing up people groups. Now, there are 3 that are relevant to the story of Ezekiel. About 605-604 BC, one of the earliest Babylonian incursions into the land, they took away talented individuals, and among them was Daniel, who ended up in the court in Babylon. Later, 598-597 BC, much of the land was sacked, Jerusalem was captured, and many of the leadership class, about 4,000 of them, were removed, and that's when Ezekiel was taken into the Babylon area. And then later, 587-586, following a siege, the Babylonians sacked completely the land, sacked and destroyed Jerusalem, burnt it to the ground, took away what was left of a new leadership class, and the nation ceased to exist. Jeremiah, who'd been the prophet in Jerusalem at this time, Ezekiel was in Babylon, Jeremiah much older, he was taken away to Egypt against his will, and he died there in Egypt. So there are 3 deportations that are relevant for us. Chapters 8 to 11, Ezekiel was deported. He was living south of Babylon, the city itself, with about 8,000 exiles. We saw in chapter 1 of Ezekiel's book his remarkable vision, precisely dated 5 years after his exile. He then told to enact the prophecy, showing how Jerusalem would finally be sacked. This was going to happen in 586. He then received another remarkable vision, again precisely dated. In this vision, he's given a picture of what was actually going on under the radar in Jerusalem at the time. Idolatry and evil had penetrated the very center of religious life. It was at the heart of the nation. God had been pushed out by the people, and when the whole of society had gone corrupt, the nation was socially, morally, and ethically falling apart. It couldn't withstand any pressure from outside. And in this vision, Ezekiel had that terrible insight and picture. He saw God moving from the center of the Lord's house in Jerusalem, the temple, and moving out of the inner center area of the worship of God's people. And a little later it gets even worse. When he sees the vision of God, the glory of the Lord went up from within the city and stopped above the mountain east of it. God had finally left his people. They had pushed him out so much, he moved out. That's the final tragedy. When we continually push God to the margins of our life, God does not push us around. Finally, he says, well, if you want it that way, you can have it that way. And he abandoned his central position in the life of his people. But we lose his protection, we lose his power, we lose his presence, and we lose real purpose in life. That's what Ezekiel saw. But he also saw a way ahead. The future lay with the exiles. God was willing to restore them, but it would require the establishment of an entirely new order of life. And God would provide the inner resources within individual people to enable it to happen. But this could only happen if the people were willing to remove the sources of evil in the nation. Ezekiel was working among the exiles, and the descendants of these exiles, the penny did drop. They committed themselves to removing the sources of evil, and God did bring them back. He needed this commitment. But if it didn't respond, God would not force them. God would leave them to run their own way. Now they did come back. They did renew things and start again, but it didn't last. From that nation Jesus was born. And finally, the leadership, the spiritual leadership and political leadership rejected Jesus. They wanted the nation to go back to their way. They didn't want God messing it up. And the final end of the nation came in AD 70, when Jerusalem was sacked, finally, and the nation was wiped out. Now, with that background, let's move on. Ezekiel is now shown that this final sacking of Jerusalem in 586 BC, under the Babylonians, this was coming soon. But the exiles in Babylon, drawn from the leadership classes of Jerusalem of the past, they simply didn't believe it. Ezekiel had two real difficult tasks now. He had to show the inevitability of this destruction of Jerusalem, which was going to happen a mere 5 to 6 years later. But he also had to show that the false prophets were spreading wrong ideas. There were plenty of people who predicted, oh, God will rescue the nation, we'll be taken back, everything will be okay. And he had to show these people were simply wrong. And he had to reveal God's insights, not Ezekiel's insights, but God's insights. So that's the focus of the first part of this presentation, and then we'll look at the other part later in the presentation. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, you are living among a rebellious people. They have eyes to see, but do not see, and ears to hear, but do not hear, for they are a rebellious people. Now that goes back and reminds us. I put up the words of Ezekiel in blue, but it reminds us of the words of Isaiah and Jeremiah in the other two colours there. Many years before, Isaiah had seen the people will be ever hearing but never understanding, ever seeing but never perceiving. Jeremiah saw the same thing, who have eyes but do not see, ears but do not hear. The people in Jerusalem simply refused to listen to what God was saying through his prophets. And Ezekiel was just following the same pattern. Therefore, Son of man, now he's got to carry out an enacted prophecy now. Pack your belongings for exile, and in the daytime, as they watch, set out and go from where you are to another place. Perhaps they will understand, though they are rebellious people. During the daytime, while they watch, bring out your belongings packed for exile. Then in the evening, while they are watching, go out like those who go into exile. While they watch, dig through the wall and take your belongings out through it. Put them on your shoulder as they are watching, and carry them out at dusk. Cover your face that you cannot see the land, for I have made you a sign to the Israelites. He's going to carry out an enacted exile. The Babylonians created the city and was just rubble. Picture digging through the wall. Covering their face as they left. The exiles that were going to be deported would never see their land again. Yes, some of their descendants would, but they would never see it again. So I did as I was commanded. During the day I brought out my things packed for exile. Then in the evening I dug through the wall with my hands. I took my belongings out at dusk, carrying them on my shoulders, while they watched. In the morning the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, did not the Israelites, that the rebellious people, ask you, what are you doing? People were watching him. Say to them, when they ask you, say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. This prophecy concerns the prince in Jerusalem and all the Israelites who are there. Say to them, I am a sign to you. As I have done, so it will be done to them. They will go into exile as captives. The people that Ezekiel was speaking to, they didn't believe it. They just thought God would rescue the land. And Ezekiel is saying, no, God is showing Jerusalem will be sacked and you'll go into captivity. A sign, it was an action that conveyed meaning. He was enacting visually to communicate his message. The prince among them will put his things on his shoulder at dusk and leave, and a hole will be dug in the wall for him to go through. He will cover his face so that he cannot see the land. I will spread my net for him, and he'll be caught in my snare. I'll bring him to Babylonia, the land of the Chaldeans, but he will not see it. There he will die. I will scatter to the winds all those around him, his staff and all his troops, and I will pursue them with drawn sword. Now the word that's used for prince shows that it's referring to Zedekiah. Remember, Zedekiah was put on the throne by the Babylonians, a kind of puppet king. And this is exactly what did happen. When he realized that there was no hope, he tried to flee. But he was caught by the Babylonians, brought back to Jerusalem, cruelly blinded, having watched his sons be executed, the last thing he ever saw. and then he was taken in chains to Babylon as an exile. Grim picture. They will know that I am the Lord when I disperse them among the nations and scatter them through the countries. But I will spare a few of them from the sword, famine, and plague, so that in the nations where they go, they may acknowledge all their detestable practices. Then I will know that they will know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel, like Jeremiah and Isaiah before him, was predicting what was going to happen. And when it did happen, people started to recognize that they were prophets of God. He was speaking God's mind. He had it right. He was hearing God correctly. And there'll be a growing recognition among the exiles that God is just. They brought it on themselves by their behavior. The principle is there are inevitable consequences for human actions. God doesn't magically just rescue us all the time when we thumb our noses at him and go our own way. Now there's a deep, deep message for the West today in this. But even more, there's a deep, deep message for the churches in the West today. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, tremble as you eat your food, and shudder in fear as you drink your water. Say to the people of the land, this is what the sovereign Lord says about those living in Jerusalem and in the land of Israel. They will eat their food in anxiety and drink their water in despair, for their land will be stripped of everything in it because of the violence of all who live there. The inhabited towns will be laid waste, and the land will be desolate. Then you will know that I am the Lord. In fact, what happened when the Babylonian army went south? They just battered the land into submission, smashing up cities, towns. The agricultural basis of the nation was destroyed. Food was stolen. And the people that were left, who were the poor people of the land, they were barely surviving to create food and find water just to live. And everything of value in the land the Babylonians took back to the land of Babylonia. Back to our picture. Ezekiel was shown this final sacking which took place in 586. He's shown it was coming soon. But the exiles of Babylon simply didn't believe it. He enacted it before their eyes. Now that's been the focus of this first part. But amongst the exiles, over the years, there have been many who prophesied falsely. So we're going to focus on how was Ezekiel to deal with that. And God reveals to him the wrong things that were going related to prophecy, and there are great lessons for us in this today. Let's pick it up at chapter 12, verse 21. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, what is this proverb you have in the land of Israel? The proverb is the days go by and every vision comes to nothing. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I'm going to put an end to this proverb, and they will no longer quote it in Israel. Say to them, the days are near when every vision will be fulfilled. Ezekiel was speaking to his people. For there be no more false visions or flattering divinations among the people of Israel. But I, the Lord, will speak what I will, and it shall be fulfilled without delay. For in your days, you rebellious people, I will fulfill whatever I say, declares the sovereign Lord. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, the Israelites are saying, the vision he sees is for many years from now, and he prophesies about the distant future. Therefore say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. None of my words will be delayed any longer. Whatever I say will be fulfilled, declares the sovereign Lord. Prophecy is delivered for the hearers in the here and now. God reveals to men and women how he, God, sees a specific situation. And what is revealed must have meaning for the actual hearers. And it is given to have the potential to benefit the hearers. Now just ponder these three aspects of prophecy, which Ezekiel is emphasizing here, and it's consistent with Old Testament teaching. Prophecies are shown to be true because they come true for the hearers. We can't just flick it into the distance, say it's not relevant for us. Now he's speaking somewhere around about 592 BC. Within 6 years, the land had been decimated and the city fell, razed to the ground, stripped, and their king blinded and removed. It all came true very quickly. Into chapter 13. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the prophets of Israel who are now prophesying. Now there are lots of other people saying things. Say to those who prophesy out of their own imaginations, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the foolish prophets who follow their own spirit and have seen nothing. Your prophets, Israel, are like jackals among the ruins. You have not gone up to the breaches in the wall to repair it, for the people of Israel, so that it will stand firm in the battle on the day of the Lord. Their visions are false, their divinations a lie. Even though the Lord has not sent them, they say, the Lord declares, and expect him to fulfill their words. Have you not seen false visions and uttered lying divinations when you say, the Lord declares, though I have not spoken? Very easy to speak out of our own imagination. We claim it's the word of the Lord. How easy it is to stand up and make pronouncements and declarations. We've got to be very cautious when we listen to them. Prophecy still occurs today widely, but much of it is false prophecy because it's made out of our own imagination. Today, it's often made up of wishful thinking, what we would like things to be. And it is not based on hearing the word of the Lord. And the word foolish doesn't mean these prophets were stupid. It means they just followed their own spirit. They've seen nothing. They've got themselves at the centre of the picture, and their thoughts, their intellects, their viewpoints. Well, we're all capable of this. We need to listen to what God's saying. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Because of your false words and lying visions, I am against you, declares the sovereign Lord. My hand will be against the prophets who see false visions and utter lying divinations. They will not belong to the council of my people, or be listed in the records of Israel, nor will they enter the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am the sovereign Lord. False prophets are seen to be false because what they predict doesn't come to take place. But we've got to recognize that false prophets, they did immense damage to the people of God then. Jeremiah had endless battles with them, for example. But they're doing immense damage to God's people today. But God rejects them. Let's be cautious. Let's be biblically wise. Moving on. Now, Son of man, set your face against the daughters of your people who prophesy out of their own imagination. Not just men, but women were involved too. Prophecy is not restricted to men, as the New Testament makes clear. Prophesy against them and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the women who sew magic charms on all their wrists and make veils of various lengths for their heads in order to ensnare people. Will you ensnare the lives of my people but preserve your own? You have profaned me among my people for a few handfuls of barley and scraps of bread. By lying to my people who listen to lies, you have killed those who should not have died, and have spared those who should not live. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against your magic charms with which you ensnare people like birds, and I will tear them from your arms. I will set free the people that you ensnare like birds. I will tear off your veils and save my people from your hands. They will no longer fall prey to your power. Then you will know that I am the Lord, because you disheartened the righteous with your lies, when I had brought them no grief. Because you encouraged the wicked not to turn from their evil ways, and so save their lives. Therefore you will no longer see false visions or practice divination. I will save my people from your hands, and then you will know that I am the Lord. Now the descriptions here, look at it, it's a bit closer to witchcraft. Now let's be honest. Sometimes prophecy today is closer to that. Sometimes it's crystal ball gazing, and people are merely expressing what they would like to be, or they're seeking power over others, which is part of witchcraft. The nation of Judah was in a time of crisis, threatened by people groups all around. When that happens, we're vulnerable to occultic influences, and that's happening in the West today. You see, the occultic magic offers power and control over others. And the danger is that we use the whole prophetic idea to be seen, to be powerful, to be reverenced, to be on a platform, to have power over others. And it stands completely in opposition to the whole concept of servanthood that Jesus demonstrated and lived so vividly before our eyes. Always he was seeking the best for the other. Never to manipulate, never to control, never to bend the truth for his own advantage. Servanthood, seeking the best for the other. Oh, there are deep, deep messages for us in this today. Going on into chapter 14, some of the elders of Israel came to me and sat down in front of me. Then the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, these men have set up idols in their hearts and put wicked stumbling blocks before their faces. Should I let them inquire of me at all? Therefore speak to them and tell them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. When any of the Israelites set up idols in their hearts and put a wicked stumbling block before their faces, and then go to a prophet, I, the Lord, will answer them myself in keeping with their great idolatry. I will do this to recapture the hearts of the people of Israel who have deserted me for their idols. Therefore say to the people of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Repent, turn from your idols, and renounce all your detestable practices. When any of the Israelites or any foreigners residing in Israel separate themselves from me and set up idols in their hearts and put a wicked stumbling block before their faces, and then go to a prophet to inquire of me, I, the Lord, will answer them myself. I will set my face against them, make them an example and a byword. I will remove them from my people. Then you will know that I am the Lord. And if the prophet is enticed to utter a prophecy, I, the Lord, have enticed that prophet, and I will stretch out my hand against him and destroy him from among the people of Israel. They will bear their guilt. The prophet with his guilt is the one who consults them. Then the people of Israel will no longer stray from me, nor will they defile themselves any more with all their sins. They will be my people, and I will be their God, declares the sovereign Lord. People were beginning to notice amongst the exile, and the elders, the leaders amongst them, were coming to Ezekiel, seeking some sort of direction. But they weren't prepared to change their thinking or their ways. We can summarize this in the whole area of prophecy. There's a central blockage that relates to two issues. The leaders of the people, or the people themselves, can come seeking spiritual direction, but they only want to hear what they want to hear. Faced with this, prophets are tempted to offer to leaders or to people what fits in with what they want. That was the fundamental problem and issue that Ezekiel is addressing, that God had shown to him. He could never have got this himself. God cannot and will not make himself known to people who choose to center their lives on something else. That was what was happening in Judah. That was what was happening among the exiles. Sadly, that's what's happening in many areas of our church life today in the West. He won't make himself known. He'll leave us to face the inevitable consequences. If we choose to center our lives on something else, actions have consequences. And God will not magically rescue us. He'll allow things to take their inevitable course. You see, it's all coming back to the central thing in the Old Testament of idolatry. When we put someone else at the center of our life, when we push God to the margins of our life, then we will reap the whirlwind of the consequences for our decisions. Let's pursue this a bit further. What does God think of all this? That's what is shown to Ezekiel. It's centered in verses 7 and 8. When any of the Israelites or any foreigner residing in Israel separate themselves from me, we've pushed God to the margins, set up idols in their heart. We're working with something that's got greater priority, and put a wicked stumbling block before their faces. It leads to behavior which is not ethical. And then they go to a prophet to inquire of me. I, the Lord, will answer them myself. I will set my face against them and make them an example and a byword. I will remove them from my people. Then you will know that I am the Lord. God allows us to face the consequences for our actions, and he will not show himself when we only want him to show himself to conform to our agenda. Just look at that little sentence. The sovereign Lord God of the universe is not open to human manipulation. Prophecy is not crystal ball gazing about what we want, and we decide our agenda and try to make God fit into it. That's not the way it works. That is the insight that Ezekiel brings to us as he brought to the people of his time. And it's an insight that we need to learn in the churches in the West today. That's the whole passage again that I read a moment or two ago. Let's just take the bit at the bottom, because there's a problem here. How can God mislead and then punish people when they are misled? When you read this, that's what it seems to be saying. And critics of the Bible are quick to jump on that and make a fool of it. Now, it comes back to the fact that this was not written in English. And there's the subtlety of language. That word enticed could be translated by a number of words with similar meaning, but it also carries the idea, it's not quite the same as enticed in English. It's the idea of being gullible, willing to be enticed. And what this passage is actually saying is, those who insist on pursuing their own agendas will get answers that fit with their own agendas. They will bend and twist whatever God says to fit in with the agenda that they predetermined. And sadly, there's a lot of that going on in churches in the West today. Got to be very careful when we read this. There's subtleties in language, and it's very straightforward and very easy. And once we see that subtlety in the word enticed, then it all starts to make sense. Bringing this together, because there are deep messages about prophecy. Prophecy is a dangerous business for all involved, and yet it is vitally important that we have people who can hear what God is saying in a specific situation and reveal it to his people. The prophet speaks the mind of God into a specific situation. It's not celestial fortune telling. What's very clear from the biblical books of prophecy, the prophet does not choose what he or she is to say. And the prophet does not choose those to whom it has to be said. Think of the book of prophecy of Jonah. They didn't want to say it, so he went the opposite way. And he certainly didn't want to say it to the people to whom he was sent. And let's not get fooled. The language is very clear in the original. A prophet is not a preacher, not a teacher, and certainly not a celestial fortune teller. And today in the West, again amongst churches, there's far too much teaching that rips prophecy out into celestial fortune telling. That's a real danger. And if you look at the overall picture of the Old Testament prophets, often they went into the job very unwillingly. They knew what they were facing. To speak the mind of God into a specific situation does not make you popular, and they faced considerable opposition and hardship. Look at the life of Jeremiah. His life was on the line on several occasions, and he suffered terrible abuse. Because he did speak the mind of God, but the opposition was enormous. Here's a simple way to look at it, and it's true of the whole Bible, not just prophecy. When we look at prophecy, ask, when was it spoken? Get it in its context. Where? To whom? Prophecies are addressed to people. Why was it spoken? Why did God reveal this to a man or a woman so that it could be shared? Then ask the fundamental question, how would the original hearers have got it? Because it was spoken to them. Now, when you get the answers to these, which is a very straightforward and simple process, then we can start to think what it means for us today. That's the approach I've tried to adopt in all my series and books of prophecy. Hopefully it avoids some of the extremism and celestial fortune telling that's become a fashion today. That's the danger. It was for the people, the leadership classes particularly in the days of Ezekiel. We only want to hear what we want to hear. That's bigger than prophecy. It's true in a lot of church life in the West. How is a prophet to react? Are we going to go down the line of Ezekiel or Jeremiah or Isaiah or any of the great prophets of the Old Testament? The temptation is to offer what fits in with what we want. So they speak to please their audience. That is not speaking the mind of God into a specific situation. The number of prophecies I've heard that seem to indicate that revival is just round the corner, some with great precision saying exactly where it's going to come. I look back over the decades, it's never happened. People wanted it to happen. In many ways it seemed a good thing to happen. But it wasn't a God thing to happen because we were not ready for it, because we were following our own agendas. It all comes back to idolatry, someone else at the center of the frame of our life. That's a deliberate, conscious decision. And God only speaks and reveals his mind when we are genuinely seeking what he's going to say to us. God will not respond to those who've already got their agenda. Let's be honest. Have we got an agenda? In our churches and Christian groups in the West, have we got things that we want to happen? They may be good things in our eyes, but are they God things? And prophets are speaking in terms of it being in line with divine authority, not public popularity. And that often makes them unpopular, vilified, even hated. But one of the pictures that runs through the biblical record, and it's here in Ezekiel, grace characterizes God. There is always hope. Hope. And it's something we've got to look at today, to get down on our knees and to say, where have we got it wrong? Because God will hear and reveal himself to us when we take that attitude, when we want God back at the center of the frame. His grace is always there. God's grace is always there, yes. But we need to look at the meaning of judgment and link it to grace. I'm going to touch upon that in the next presentation.